everyone, and welcome back to the Ladies of Lore podcast, where we try on makeup from the different eras while exploring the makeup of that era.
Today, we're going to explore the Elizabethan era. If you're new to the podcast, every week we meet up and give you the juicy gossip of a time in history while replicating the makeup trends of that era. We look at one overarching question to give you viewers the answer.
This week, it's going to be tricky.
The topic of discussion this week is the question, what effects did boys playing women's roles have during the Elizabethan era?
Juicy.
Now, before we get into the juicy details of the Elizabethan lore theater traditions, let's show you what we're working with. This is our inspiration photo, and this is the makeup that we're using, courtesy of Khloe.
First, we're gonna start by making our faces pale white, just like this guy.
Now that we all look like Mrs. Doubtfire, hello! Let's get into our initial questions. First one being, why were women not allowed on stage?
How did men embody these roles?
How did men dress to look like women?
What was the training that boys went through to portray women?
What age did boys play women?
What was the acting style like back then?
These questions led us through our research and helped us come to our final concluding answer.
Listen until the end to find out what it is.
Now, obviously, they didn't have this white face paint in the 17th century. When a person wanted to put makeup on their face, they would use something called Venetian ceruse. It had hydroxide and mercury in it.
Picture this. It is the first half of the 17th century. You look outside your window and you see a bunch of boys. But these boys aren't wrestling around or playing kick the can. Oh no, these boys are wearing makeup, they have costumes on, and they are practicing scripts.
The reason these little gremlins were running around with painted cheeks and eyeliner was because they looked very youthful, the ideal image of a woman.
These boys were almost always prepubescent. It made them perfect to be fitted to the size of a small woman. Their lack of facial hair and high voices made them the perfect image.
As if a woman isn't the perfect image.
During the Elizabethan era, theater was all about creating an illusion on stage. This illusion was created with overdramatic lines and harsh colors. Think of a modern drag queen. Their goal was to portray a role, or a woman's role, through stereotypical makeup, clothes, wigs, and body shape.
I'm assuming that the costume and the acting style had a huge impact on the theater, but how did they do it?
Well, the acting style was known to be larger than life, kind of like melodrama. There were a lot of hand gestures, big movements on stage, and of course, the voice.
Now, before we continue, we've got to do the next step of our makeup, the blush.
Gotta make those cheeks pop.
Now, obviously, Selena Gomez isn't running around crushing beetles to create the blush for her brand Rare Beauty, but that's what they had to do in the Elizabethan era.
Men, no matter their age, typically tend to have a lot harsher features than women. So when they wanted to play the role of a woman, they would look at it as more of a caricature. They would use intense colors and lines to create the look of a woman, not only so it could be seen better on stage, but so that it could fit with their womanly character more. Makeup wasn't the only thing that men used to portray themselves as women. They would also use costuming on stage as well. Young boys would be adorned with thick pads along the sides of their hips and multiple layers of skirting to give them womanly hips. And on top, they would be wearing a very tight bodice or corset to squish the ribs and create the illusion of breasts.
How did these men even learn to act like us?
2 words, intense training.
Okay, but what did that training look like?
Oh, I bet it was similar to that one scene in Barbie Princess Charm School where Barbie has to bounce books on her head to train to be a princess.
Okay, but to be real, many actors started their careers as young boys. They didn't just need to be able to memorize lines or have girlish features. Oh no, these boys had to be able to sword fight, sing, and dance.
Dang, that's a lot more than I can do. But what would happen if a man couldn't play a woman anymore? What would they do? Where would they go?
Well, once a man hit puberty and their voice got deeper, they were no longer playing women. Instead, these boys would go and move on to playing male roles, or they would start a new life, like a new job.
Now, before we continue, we've got to do the next step of our makeup routine. These eyebrows and our guy liner.
Okay, I'm still curious. I get that boys played women, but why were women not allowed on stage?
In that era, theater was tied into prostitution, so women were not allowed on stage because it was considered dirty. Theater had a bad reputation, so Orthodox Christians did not like it. But theater was never considered a threat on the gender hierarchy.
And a lot of theaters were actually funded by the royal crown, like the King's Players.
There was a really strong theory that men were questioning their sexuality in the Elizabethan era, and these men used theater to explore that side of themselves.
Tell me more.
Yeah, there are many sources out there that say the men who participated would find themselves falling in love with the women on stage.
But in reality, those women were men.
So, similarly to blush, if somebody wanted to put on some lips when they were putting their makeup on in the Elizabethan era, they would have to crush up some sort of animal or plant and use the juices from them.
So to wrap everything up, women were not allowed to perform on stage because it was tied into prostitution. But makeup and costumes were a huge part of how to look like a woman. And their makeup was really good, unlike ours. That the men in the audience would question their sexuality to whether or not they liked the man or the character on stage.
So, to answer our overarching question,
The main effects of boys playing women's roles in theater was the rise in differentiation between sexuality and gender. Women characters became more prominent figures on stage, and the male actors figured out that they could portray these women effectively. Then, as the demand for women became stronger, they played these roles themselves.
Plus, homosexual men realized that the gender they were did not have an impact on who they liked. So, men started to like each other, or men and women.
and here is the final look.
Thank you so very much for listening, and we hope you took this information with you today.
The ladies of lore
Are
Out!